I think about mountaintop experiences. I think about, K9, one of those most difficult mountains to climb, that even the most experienced climbers sometimes can't even have an opportunity to climb because it's so adverse, weather-wise. And I find it interesting that some of these most experienced climbers spend years, their lifetimes, developing their skill. And they can climb in most any kind of weather, but they're not stupid. They will listen to the weather, look at weather reports. They'll climb to a certain elevation and have camp there. I think part of that is to see what's going to happen next. Part of it is to get acclimated to the elevations. And so they move from base camp to next level to the next level. And at some point, then they decide whether they're going to remain climbing. And sometimes when they're in the midst of a climb up, they'll see something or hear something coming, and they'll go back down the mountain for another day, maybe months away. And I think, how disheartening. You plan your life almost for this one climb, and you get part of the way and you can't continue. But you keep your life. You keep the people with you, their life safe too. So always climbing mountains is not always the most advantageous things. Always. We see Jesus climbing the mount with his two disciples, and I imagine it's not extremely high or difficult pathways and things like that, but it's a mountain in terms of a sacred place for many people. Moses was up there. Now Jesus spends time up there. He's with his disciples, his favored three. And on the mountain, they do see some amazing things. Unexpected things. How do you bring that back home with you? This experience is burned inside your brains, the sight, the vision, the Moses, the Elijah, Jesus, transfigured, transformed into something amazing, white and glistening and bright. And also hearing the voice of God once again, saying, "This is my beloved Son. Listen to him. I'm well pleased with him." That's got to make a difference in your lives. And for the disciples, they've got to remain quiet until Jesus' death and resurrection. How do you sit on a secret like that? That's got to be tough. And yet, I'm sure there's some winks going on between the three of them and Jesus. They know what's going on. The rest of the disciples probably don't. But it's that one experience for them, a lifetime. Something they didn't plan on, and yet it changed them. I imagine they saw Jesus in a different light. He wasn't simply some rabbi walking around the plains, talking to people and helping people and healing people. He was something much more because of this. I suspect they saw a much bigger picture of Jesus than the rest of the world had at the time. And so fear would settle in because now things will change. And they're not certain how that will change or what will happen. As some of us, when we encounter change, it's not so much the fear of change, it's the fear of loss. And so I imagine for them, they are in a pickle in some ways because they're not sure what to expect. And yet they remain true to Jesus, and they follow him down into the valley, and they continue on with him in the journey of his life and his ministry and his mission. In the Canadian Rockies, there are valleys. There's one particular valley that's lush. It's got a river running through it. It's where wildlife used to congregate. Part of the conservation efforts of Canada are non-existent. The complaint for the ecologists and the conservationists is every time there's a nice valley with a lush valley, they plant hotels there. Boom, boom, boom. It's more about tourism and bringing the money in than it is for conserving the wildlife. Because now the wildlife is not coming anymore because, obviously, there are buildings there, people there, and their habitat's been messed up. But yet, the valleys are lush and green and where life teems in any ordinary circumstance. When you're on the mountains, you look out and you see not just mountain, but you see valleys too. It's often said that the mountaintop experience can never be repeated sometimes. and that Jesus went into the valley to do his hard work, his, down-to-earth ministry. And yet, we know that valleys can be places of beauty as well. They can be lush and green. They can be harsh too, as mountains can be harsh as well. Jesus took them on a journey from the mountaintops to the valleys to give them a whole sense of what the experience of life is all about. We know this. We've been there many times. Sometimes in the mundane, those things happen that we don't expect, and it touches us in some ways. Sometimes it changes us in little ways too. Maybe it changes our outlook or perspective sometimes. Sometimes that's exactly what we need. And we didn't have to go into a mountaintop experience. Oh, in the old days, the cathedrals were built with high, high ceilings. Because, God is up there, and the higher the ceiling, then your praises go up to God. And it's not, you know what I'm saying. Good for praises for God. It's bad for that organ installer that's got to put speakers up in the peaks with running wires all the way down and across on 4, 5, 6 sections of scaffolding. Not so good for that, but we know that's what we're thinking and doing. Praise is going up to God. And wonderful acoustics, too, for singing things. Peter was one of the disciples who, of course, spoke sometimes before he thought. We know that. But he's enthusiastic. He wants it to continue. And I think the building of the dwellings is a place to stay on the mountain, to stay in that moment, and to make that moment last forever. And we know sometimes that does not happen. And Jesus dismisses that and doesn't even address that. He says, no, we'll go back down. Remember what you've seen. Don't tell anyone, because they won't believe this until my resurrection. There's a time and place for everything, Peter, James, and John. For right now, it's enough that you three know and have seen and experienced. And now it's up for us to continue that journey into the valley, a place of beauty, a place of hardness, a place of diversity. But that's where life is, too. High places can disorient us. Once we get used to them, they become beautiful places too. Valleys are beautiful places. I was thinking about this the other day when I was shoveling snow for the umpteenth time and walking scarlet and ice-covered sidewalks and cursing the weather in Wisconsin and Minnesota and the Midwest, thinking, I think I'd like to live in Arizona or somewhere where it's warm all the time and don't have to worry about this stuff. And I think about the people that live in the northern parts of Alaska or Finland or Norway or Russia or some of the most harsh weather you can imagine. And there are people living there and call it their home. And they adapt and they make life beautiful wherever they're at. For me, I can't understand having 2 hours or 3 hours of daylight in the wintertime, but people do that. People are everywhere. They're in the highest of peaks. They're in the lowest of valleys. They're in the harshest of weather. And yet that's where God's people lie. And that's where they make their homes. And that's where they do their ministry and their missions. Wherever. We're adaptable. We can journey to many different places. Experience many different things. This transfiguration we study every year. We talk about every year and we celebrate it every year. And we hope it makes an impact on our lives. We look for something in the Spirit to talk to us as it talked to Peter, James, and John. Even for a glimmer of a moment, our lives can be changed. And we seek the Spirit. And we seek that comfort and peace that Jesus would give his disciples, as saying, do not fear. I know you are a little nervous about coming changes, but I am with you. You'll be okay. We'll get through this. And we'll even possibly thrive. And we will thrive. And we do thrive. Jesus is with his disciples, and he never abandons them. Wherever he goes, they go. And that's the way it is with us, too. Even in the highest mountains, the lowest valleys, God is with us, holding our hand, giving us hope, telling us not to fear. Things will be okay. And we're with him. Amen.